the Panasonic S9. So if you watched my previous videos on this camera that I put out right when it came out, I should have listened to myself. No EVF, no hot shoe, no joystick, no shutter, no purchase is what I should have remembered saying and then followed. All those problems definitely come together, coalesce on this camera, and make it like such a close to perfect camera that it's really a heartbreaking deal breaker return of a purchase. But first, things I like about the camera. I really like this form factor. It's just like the right size, especially put the Sirui SIRUI grip. I'll link it in the show notes, comments, notes section below. I like this way better than the small rig grip. For me, at least, it fits my hand really nice, and I do have fat fingers. And then with this little nubbin on the back, it gives you a pretty good purchase. Although this nubbin could be a little bit bigger, but overall, very nice purchase. I could see carrying around this around all day, no problemo. Street photography would be great. This form factor. And then really the only other thing I like about this camera is that it has all of Panasonic's software improvements. Especially on the video side, there's some stuff in this camera that you can only get with Panasonic cameras, where I think like Canon, Nikon, Sony, and so on. I'm filming this in the Canon R5 II. In case you're wondering. But like none of those cameras have like anamorphic support. This has D-squeeze, both in the camera and then exporting also. So like I love those features in Lumix cameras, and this guy has it. Okay, things I don't like. The list is long. Let's get out the easy ones first. It really should have a joystick. It doesn't have a joystick. Panasonic, on the next version, put a joystick. It doesn't have a hot shoe, it has a cold shoe, which is nuts. I don't think Panasonic has a super techy hot shoe, so it shouldn't be a very expensive part. And then like it omits the ability to put in Panasonic's excellent XLR adapters. Like the new one for the GH70 even has 32-bit float. Like seems like a huge miss to not have put that in this camera. I don't get it. Similarly, I don't understand why they didn't put a shutter in here, or at least a shutter-like thing to come down and cover the sensor to keep dust off of it. In photo, it's not that big of a deal. I can kind of work around it. But in video, ironically, even though I would buy this camera more for photo use, the rolling shutter gets pretty bad because it doesn't have a mechanical shutter. So there you go. And look, I get that Panasonic wanted to compete with the Sony ZV-E1 with its S9, but that's just not how I would use it. So this review is about how I would use it, i.e. for photography, not just vlogging, like TikTok selfie taking. Another thing I don't like about this camera is what I call the Nikon ZF problem. Panasonic released this beautiful kind of retro-inspired, vibey camera, but then didn't release lenses that go with this camera. So you end up having to put something like this size on the camera, and it just looks weird and kind of feels off. With the Sirui grip on here, it's actually okay. Not too bad weight-wise, things like that, but it just looks weird. I guess you could get some of those Sigma contemporaries, but even those might be a little bit too big for the camera. And since I don't think this camera's a keeper, I didn't want to invest more money in more lenses because I'm probably going to end up returning this. Even so, I would kind of want more of a retro vibey guy with like a distance scale and an aperture ring, and like Panasonic just didn't do that. They make lenses with like an awesome focus clutch and an aperture ring. So I wish they had brought that sort of design sensibility to some smaller lenses to match this camera. Another thing I don't like about this camera is the overall build quality. It's very plasticky. The dials feel like they're gonna break soon, All the buttons are sort of almost flush to the camera, so it's really hard to tell what button is which, and they just don't feel good. Even like the on-off switch here kind of feels plastic. You feel like it might snap off on like a really rough trip. So I just wish they had put a little more quality into the camera. Another thing I don't like is that not a full-size HDMI, only one card. Two card slots would be better, or at least the Nikon ZF micro SD and a regular SD card slot. I like that it has the regular Panasonic battery, like for the S5 II and S5 IIX. That's nice continuity. The GH7 uses the same battery, so that's great. But the last thing I don't like, and this really is the deal breaker for me, is there is no EVF in this camera. The back screen, which is a flip out instead of a flip up, and I would prefer a flip up because I plan to use this for photography, or even better, like the Sony A7R5 or Panasonic GH7, flip up and flip out. I don't understand why like every camera doesn't have that now in this day and age. Um, but the resolution on this screen is extremely bad. It's very low. I'll put up the exact pixels here, but like you can't manual focus with this camera because the screen resolution is so bad. And then you don't have a viewfinder, so you can't punch in, and like you're kind of stuck with autofocus lenses. Then you go back to the Nikon ZF problem, and you're stuck with this big honking lens on the camera, and the whole thing is just not an enjoyable experience, They could have made like this amazing street photography shooter, right? All they had to do was put a nice EVF right here, okay? Make it a true rangefinder. Now, I'm sure someone's going to go in the comments and say, oh, you're asking for too much. This is a great camera. It's great for video, yada, yada. It's for people that just want to film themselves and vlog. And like for that, it's pretty good, except for the rolling shutter. But I want a photo video hybrid. I think most cameras need to be that in this day and age. But more so, what's ironic about this is that Panasonic has already done this in the past. This is the Panasonic GX7. And I think that between this camera and then the GX8, its successor, is when Panasonic kind of like started cutting corners and not putting everything they could into their cameras. And I'll explain why. So if you look at this, next to this, especially with the Siri grip on it, they look really similar. They're even a pretty similar size and everything. So, Panasonic knows how to do this, right? With the successor to this camera, the GX8, they really kind of cheaped out. The buttons they're kind of like more like the S9, very cheap and flat and stuff. Here, they're super professional. They have different heights and they stick out of the camera so you know what you're pressing. The dials feel really good. They feel almost like metallic, really like tactile and sticky and clicky and really nice. And this has like one of the coolest viewfinders ever. Why they didn't take this viewfinder and put it on the S9 is completely beyond me. If they had done that, this thing would be a game changer. This would be selling like hotcakes. All the street photographers in the world would want one, plus all the video blogger people would want one. I just don't get why they didn't just copy this camera, but make a full frame version of this camera. Now, this camera also doesn't have a joystick. It needs that. Doesn't have a doesn't have a sensor protector, but otherwise, like, this camera was like nearly perfect. And I just don't understand why Panasonic doesn't make more little rangefinder guys like this, either in their Micro Four Thirds line, which has all that awesome like Panasonic Leica glass that renders like Leica glass. Or a full frame version. I mean, like literally they could just take this, put some slightly higher quality buttons on it, put this viewfinder on it, and boom, you've got the street heater of 2024 and maybe beyond, Then I would go out and buy those Sigma lenses and try this out some more. I'll make a whole video about this camera. This is just an awesome camera, and I feel like it should get more love on YouTube. So I'm going to make a video about how great it is in hopes that Panasonic makes an updated version of this. It's just a little too long in the tooth for me probably to use forever, but man, I really like it. I love the way it feels. I love this EVF. The way it looks is dope, So Panasonic, make more cameras like this. So at this point, you may be thinking, well, he didn't talk about specs. I don't really care that much about specs. It's a 24 megapixel sensor. It's the same one on the S5 II. It's got weird record limits. Otherwise, it's basically the same camera. Okay. It doesn't have fan either, so it can overheat. That's why it has record limits. There's plenty of reviews that if you want all the specs, or just go to Panasonic's website and read them. You also might notice that I didn't talk about this button, the LUT button, which all the paid YouTube shills talked about so much because that's what Panasonic paid them to talk about. And I do think it's neat. The app is kind of neat that you can select all these different LUTs and just load them onto the camera, although it is a little bit of a cumbersome experience to do that. But, for me personally, I just want a clean RAW with good color fidelity, and Panasonic cameras generally do have good color fidelity. This camera is no exception. Um, I just want a RAW file with good color fidelity that I can then edit in post and make it look however I want. I don't really need it to look any way in the camera. It also sort of makes me laugh because even Sony cameras have the ability to do this. You can put a LUT in a Sony camera and you can mess with the settings to make the JPEGs look different. Fuji just made it sound sexy, and I think Panasonic is sort of reacting to that, like it did with the Leica looks. But for me, someone who likes to edit photos after I've taken them, it just all seems kind of silly to me. Just give me a nice, natural-looking, clean RAW with great colors that pop but still look natural. That's all I need. I'll take it from there. Thanks. So yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell with this camera. So close to being a great camera. The form factor is great. The quality is not great. The lack of a joystick, shutter, hot shoot, and EVF, and a decent backscreen are all not great. So combine that soup of disappointments means that this camera is going back, unfortunately, because I love the way it looks. I love the form factor. But it's just I won't get the results I want out of this camera. There is not enough utility, especially in terms of screens and EVF, for me to get the photos I want on a regular basis. You can't see the screen during the day, so you can't really go out and shoot during the day, in the middle of the day. So, just things like that, unfortunately, for me at least, make this a near miss, a real heartbreaker. Even more of a heartbreaker than the ZF, which was even closer to having everything you could possibly want, but it wasn't a rangefinder. This is basically a rangefinder. It's so close, So, putting this probably at the low end of the category, like the Nikon ZF, the Sony A7CR, of these compact full frame cameras where they just miss a few features that would really make the camera just perfect and awesome. And if I had to rank them, I would probably rank the Sony A7CR as the closest to getting everything right. And then the Nikon ZF would sort of be in the middle. And then this guy would be, unfortunately, at the bottom. It's missing the most stuff to really make this a great, art, street, everyday carry camera. Again, Panasonic, just make something like the GX7. Or learn from these way more perfect cameras like the Fuji X100V or the Leica Q3. Although I would say feature-wise, the X100V or 6 rather has one more feature. It has the joystick, but it's not full frame. But make a camera that has all the features these guys have, and then you'll be in the money. You'll be in the race. So another way of saying what I'm saying is take one of these cameras, right, and model it after that. Remake this camera with all your updated tech. Make a full-frame version of this with interchangeable lenses. Make an interchangeable lens version of this and with a joystick. Why is that so hard? Why are so many cameras missing just one or two features, This guy basically is pretty much perfect, except that it's not full frame, right, Again, I could care less about film simulations, and Fuji RAWs are messed up, so I do kind of want a different camera company to make it. But overall, this is probably why this sells so much, in my opinion, is that this is probably the closest to a perfect feature set for a camera. The X Pro 4, whenever it comes out, is definitely something I will jump on. Even though it's not full frame, because the shooting experience is so good because it has all the things you need to make a photography shooting experience magical, right? Joystick, good ergonomics, nice look, manual controls, aperture ring. This also a distance scale. This could use a distance scale, so you can do manual focusing, you can do autofocus, distance scale like this guy has, so you can kind of do it all in a compact, svelte, sexy package. Why is that so hard, camera companies? Anyways, rant over. Point is, while I really enjoyed my time with the Panasonic S9, and it is a really neat camera, for me, it is a really big near miss. Great form factor in this camera, but missing way too many features to really make it a useful camera for me and my use. So it's going back, unfortunately. And, on to the next one. More videos to come. What do you think about all this? Have you tried the Panasonic S9? Am I making mistakes sending it back after I got the special silver Asian edition, went to all that trouble to get it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!